Hi there. So, I wanted to tell you a story. It's something that happened in Essex Street, about a mile from here. And it's one of my favourites, and I think we can argue that this is when modern science begins in Ireland. It starts on a Friday night, the 17th of June, and there's an elephant on show in Essex Street. And we're talking the year of our Lord, 1681, so 330 years ago. Dublin's a bit smaller then, population of maybe 50, 60,000 people. And the well-to-do ones have been queuing up and paying pennies to see this exotic alien creature. Unfortunately for the elephant, the timber booth it's in catches fire. So you got to picture the scene now. We have flames and smoke, and the city's fire alarm bells are ringing to warn the residents, and we have the smell of barbecued elephant. And the crowds gather because them that couldn't afford to pay would now like to have a bit of the elephant. They want souvenirs. And the man who managed the show, a Mr. Wilkins, he wants the skeleton so that he'll still have something to display. And into the crowd steps a 27-year-old physician, Alan Mullen. He trained here in Trinity, and he has a bizarre idea. He wants to dissect the elephant. And you have to appreciate that dissecting anything was a pretty bizarre idea in the 1680s, even on the continent where dissections have been happening. But I reckon this is probably the first recorded dissection we get in Ireland. And Mullen is interesting because he's going to be one of the first scientists, modern scientists, that we get in Ireland. And a couple of years later, he goes on with some of these guys and lots of others to found what will be the first scientific society in the country, the Dublin Philosophical Society. But that's a couple of years down the road. And meanwhile, our elephant is decomposing. And the smell has gotten to be quite bad because it's now a day old. And I reckon Channel 4, if they'd been around, would have loved to be on location in Essex Street, because we have to bring in musketeers to control the crowd. And Alan Mullen is going to have to work through the night by candlelight. And he calls in the butchers, the local butchers of Dublin, to give him a hand, because this is a mammoth task that we're going to have to do to cut up this elephant. And they're going to be boiling bits of it so that they can take the meat off the bones, so that they'll be able to give Mr. Wilkins his skeleton at the end of the day as well too. And despite these unusual conditions, Mullen does the most scientific dissection. He measures everything. It's wonderful. He draws the line at tasting the green bile that he finds in the intestines. And how do I know this? Because he told me. He wrote this wonderful account. It's entertaining and it's detailed and it's just wonderful. And it becomes the definitive modern anatomy of the elephant. And it replaces the ones that had been done 1,500 years before that by Galen and Pliny. And Mullen includes this really charming diagram of the elephant. And I really recommend you go and read this. It is actually now on Google Books, and you can also read the original in Marsh's library and in the National Library as well too. It's full of lovely stuff. He muses about why elephants are afraid of mice, for instance, because a mouse would get up the trunk and get into the lungs and suffocate the elephant. But the most important thing is that he mentions something that isn't in the elephant. He's the first to record there's no pleural cavity. There's no space between the lungs and the chest wall. And that's what's really important about this, because we now know that that's an adaptation to breathing underwater. Because elephants, we now know, evolved from an aquatic ancestor. And Mullen's anatomy is the first evidence that we have for this. So this goes down in history. Mullen himself, a few years later, as I say, he's one of the key figures in the start of science in Ireland. But a couple of years after, he has to leave. I think he's to flee. It's a disastrous love affair. And he ends up in the Caribbean, and he dies tragically a few years after the elephant of a drink-related incident. But his elephant lives on. You can still find an elephant in Temple Bar. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the night Dublin dissected the elephant, and I think where modern science begins in Ireland. Thank you.